This meeting is being recorded.
Alrighty, so welcome everyone to our third workshop. So in this workshop, we're going to be talking about rights and royalties. We have specifically in the Canadian music industry. I know most of the rules kind of remain the same or similar, but we wanted to talk about the industry that we are working in so that it's a little bit more targeted to our audience. My name is Karis. Like I've said, if you've been on for previous workshops, you probably know my whole intro by now and by heart, but I started out on the creative side of the industry. So music producer, singer, songwriter, that's still primarily where I do work. But that side of the industry kind of sparked an interest in the business side and the things that happen behind the scenes. So I went and studied arts management at Harris Institute in Toronto. And that kind of propelled me into working with recording studios, putting on workshops, and now I'm here, Director of Operations for Afrowaveto, and I'll be your host for this year's workshop series. So today we have with us Nicole Pratt from SOCAN, and we have Anesta Duodo. Did I say it right? Okay, great. From Music Canada, she's also with Connect Music, which is really great. So we get, perspective from three major organizations in our industry. I'm gonna hand it over to Nicole so she can tell us a little bit more about herself, and then Anesta. If you need their full bios, we did post them on our Instagram page, and it's also on the Eventbrite page. So feel free to head there and kind of just read a little bit more. But Nicole, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So excited to be here. Thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Pratt. I am the Vice President of Reproduction Rights Operations at SOCAN. So I started, just started this year, early, top of the year, January, so I'm really new over at SOCAN. And prior to that, I worked for a publishing company as Director of Administration. Prior to that, I worked with CMRRA for a number of years. So I've been in the industry for quite some time. Also started my journey as an artist, wanting to be an artist and songwriter, singer-songwriter, went to Fanshawe to learn about production. So it's kind of been something that's been a part of my life for a really long time. So really happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, Anesta.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Anesta, and I am Associate Counsel at Music Canada and Connect Music Licensing. So the work that we do really focuses a lot on advocacy on behalf of the Canadian recorded music industry, and also licensing for this reproduction of sound recordings that are used in Canada. Before joining these organizations, I'd worked at the federal government focusing on copyright law policy. And then previously, I also spent some time interning at SOCAN, actually, which is where I first got into music and law and decided to stick with it. And now I'm so happy to be where I am here and to being able to talk to you guys a bit more about rights and royalties.
Amazing. Before we kind of jump into the meat of it all, Anesta, just give me an overview of what your job is. What is associate counsel, and how does that relate with, being in the music industry and working at Music Canada and working at Connect Music as well?
So associate counsel is really just a fancier word for lawyer. So I'm a lawyer at these organizations. So the work that I do really focuses on like policy and research on the advocacy side. So working with government to ensure that policies that are being pushed through or legislation really benefits the music industry. And then on the Connect side, the work is a lot more on the licensing of the music and trying to find new avenues that can support the artists that we represent, as well as the labels. I think that'll cover it.
And how about you, Nicole? What does your typical day look like as VP of Reproduction Rights at SOCAN? Oh, I think you're
Let
still
me
on mute.
unmute. Yeah, sorry. Typical day. There is no typical day. That's funny because every day is different. But generally, it's just taking care of the day-to-day in the reproduction rights division of SOCAN, ensuring that we're servicing our clients, looking for efficiencies, monitoring our registrations, our licensing, our distributions, making sure we can deliver to the clients that we serve and that we're helping them to monetize and provide the best service. So it's different every day, but yeah, it's basically on the operations side. Yeah.
Awesome. And could you just give us we could start with the acronym because I always forget what SOCAN means in full. But just give us just a rundown of SOCAN. I do know, as being an artist in the Canadian industry, that it's one of the major players in terms of organizations and rights and royalties. So just kind of give us, and the attendees a little rundown about what SOCAN is. What part do
Yeah.
you play?
Yeah, so SOCAN is a society of authors and composers, and it's basically it's an organization. It's a rights management organization. Historically, SOCAN has been known primarily for performing rights, so rights that are performed outside, like live concerts, airplay, radio play, the things like that. But SOCAN recently acquired. SODRAC, which was the French reproduction rights organization located in Quebec. We became SOCAN RR, so SOCAN Reproduction Rights. So we're managing both rights on the performing rights and reproduction rights side. So physical product that's released or digital streaming or sync rights. So now it's kind of a more fulsome organization, I guess you say, rights organization.
Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome. And Anesta, just a little bit about Music Canada, Connect. I know for me, like these were, I like SOCAN right out the box, as you say, royalties, like everybody says SOCAN. But it took a little bit more delving for me to even know Music Canada and Connect. So just kind of give us an overview of what those two organizations do.
Yeah, for sure. So Music Canada is the trade association of Canada's major record labels. That's Sony, Warner, and Universal. So we advocate on their behalf on public policy, but also for the general music industry in Canada. And then Connect is the sister organization, which is the licensing branch. So more of like a SOCAN type of organization.
Yeah.
So while they do the public performance and the reproduction on the musical work side, at Connect, we license and then distribute royalties for the reproduction of sound recordings. So a lot of our members who sign up with Connect are either record labels or artists who own the masters in their sound recordings, meaning that they're the ones who own the actual sound recording of the song. So the work that we do is to work with businesses who want to use that music so that they're licensed, and then we distribute that to the rights holders.
And you use the word licensing a lot. I don't want to take it for granted that everybody here knows what that means. So could you just give us just a rundown of what that actually means in the music industry?
Yeah, for sure. So the way that I think of licensing is essentially artists have rights to their music. And for someone else to want to use that music, they need to get permission. And while you can go directly to the artist through companies or rights organizations like Connect and SOCAN, they are able to get permission to use that music, and that is their license. So in exchange for the use, they need to make a payment, and that payment is then distributed to the rights holders, either artists or labels, as a royalty.
Awesome, thank you. And just on, I guess Nicole, you could jump in here too because of just all your expertise and just where you've worked, over the years. So Anesta, you brought up like specifically rights in relations to the masters. So from experience, I know that that's different from the royalties that the creator gets. So maybe Nicole, if you want to jump in, just kind of explain for us just that division and how that's looked at from a rights and royalties perspective.
Yeah, so like Anessa said, on the SOCAN side, we're really looking at the works, like the composition. So not the sound recording, not the physical sound recording, but the composition, the music that you create. So there's kind of two sides to that. There's the performing rights, there's the reproduction right, and there's copyright in creation. So as soon as you create a work, as soon as you write a song, you're the copyright owner. There's copyright in that creation. So you are able to monetize, you're able to collect royalties on behalf of, for yourself, for whether for performance or for reproduction. So if you were to, record the music, sell the music, you would be entitled to a reproduction right. If your song appeared on the radio or on streaming service, you'd be able to collect a performance and a reproduction right in that case, as well. So there's a couple elements that actually make up the copyright itself, that a rights owner can collect.
I would advise everyone to like take notes. I'm taking notes. It's one of those areas that if you sit and you just like nodding, you'll completely miss it. So if you're an attendee here and this is like, new to you, go ahead and write it down. Send your questions because we want to make sure that when you do leave the workshop, you have a better understanding of just what you're entitled to and, as an artist and how all of that gets to you. So do take notes. So you spoke about copyright like coming in place as soon as you create something. Is there like a process of, do you need to register this copyright, or is it just that I create the song and it's here and it's I now own that copyright?
So, I mean, Anessa, because as the lawyer can probably elaborate on this, but
Yeah.
I would say, like I said, there is copyright in creation. That's how the copyright law works. Where it makes sense to register your work or officially copyright your work, if you want to ensure that you protect yourself against any kind of claim or litigation or anything like that, you're going to need to ensure that you have your work copywritten in such a way that you can prove that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so if you don't, and you still own it, it's fine. But when you come down to where someone's going to dispute that or make a claim, then you're going to have to prove that you own that copyright. But I'll let Anasta elaborate too.
Anesta, just a question to you. What would serve as that proof? Because I know, so I'm originally from Jamaica. I actually live there now, but I'm visiting in Canada. And there was a point where they're like, okay, I forgot what the actual term is called, but it's like send yourself the music through like registered mail. And then I came here and someone sent me to a site where you would actually like pay to have your music registered. But then just over the years, people are like, oh, well, you record your music at home. So, if something came down to it, there's like a timestamp from your computer and like what serves as like proof. Like, how crazy do I need to go to like make sure if it came down to it, I would be good in terms of proving that I own something?
Luckily in Canada, it is quite easy. We have the Canadian Intellectual Property Office, like CIPO. And when you go online, you pay like a minimal fee and you're able to just copyright your work. Like that's going to be the official proof that like you are the owner of the copyright in your song, for example. So you can do like mailing it to yourself type of situation, but luckily there's a more straightforward way. And the other benefit of registering your copyright is that if there was a dispute that came up and you unfortunately had to end up going to court over this, the damages that you're entitled to as an artist can also be higher because of that proof of registration. So it's not necessary, as Nicole said, because as soon as it's created, it's fixed, you are the copyright owner, but it's just, I think, like a fail-safe mechanism to have that as well, just in case you need it.
And I know I didn't send this question, but it just came to me. So if any of you are able to jump in on it, how does that work with the world of social media that we're in? Because more and more that, I'm on Instagram or like TikTok, I'll see people putting out previews of their songs before they're officially out. So if an artist, and I know that sometimes that does help with promo and getting an audience for the song before the song even drops. From a legal perspective, what is your opinion on that? Is that something that artists should refrain from doing? Or is it that you can, kind of have something in place so that if you do that, on social media, that you won't be, putting yourself and your career at risk?
I will say, like you said, it is a really great marketing tactic to put out previews because that's how you get like fans kind of engaged
Yeah.
in the full song that's coming out. And again, because there is copyright as soon as you create the work, you will be protected. Even if you do put out a preview, someone can't listen to your preview and then say that it's theirs and then try to collect royalties for that, because you are the copyright owner as the artist. So you'll be protected in that way.
Okay, awesome. That is good to know. I know we did have a teacher at Harris was like, I see you all putting out your music on social media. But he was just kind of giving us this like, be careful about how you go about distributing your music, especially before you actually officially do everything. So it's good to hear that from a lawyer, legal perspective. So what I wanted to actually move on to next was kind of looking at the different royalties that are available. I know, Nicole, you kind of touched on that. I know a lot of people kind of know it from a artist perspective in terms of, okay, I get played on the radio, then the royalties. If Spotify, if I'm getting streams on Spotify, then their royalties. But could you just kind of, Nicole, jump in and let us know what the other avenues may be and the terminology around and those, royalties as well?
So the different types of royalties you can collect potentially? Okay. So you were saying outside of radio or streaming. So there's
Yeah.
other avenues you could, there's sync royalties that you could collect. So if you ever, so when I talk about sync or synchronization, I'm talking about when you sync music to audiovisual images, so in TV or film, that is a right, that's a reproduction right that people have to also make sure that they get licensed to use. There's post-sync, which I think a lot of people don't always know about, post-synchronization royalties. And that is specific to copying music when someone needs to copy music to facilitate a broadcast. So if they need to copy music to ensure that they can broadcast on a video on demand service or a radio broadcaster, they're still making a copy of that music. So that is a post synchronization copy. Other things could be like physical. So if you're pressing a CD or vinyl, on the PRs, like on the performing rights side, there's live performance, so concerts, anything that you're doing like that. We said radio, we said streaming, background music. So if your music is being played in a restaurant, a bar, or someplace like that, there has to be a license that's put in place, or that establishment has to have a license to play that music, and that's also part of the performing rights that SOCAN also distributes. So yeah, there's that. What about you, Anasta? Am I missing anything?
Those are the same ones that I had on my list. I think the background music was a really important one because I think you don't necessarily think of your music being played at like a Starbucks, but you're getting paid for that even if you don't know about it. So
exactly, yeah,
find those royalties.
I know we did have a question here. Well, we have two questions now. Okay, I'm going to take the first one. Jasmine, I see your question, and I'll see if we can kind of fit that in a little bit later, just based on, the flow of things. So we did get, how do you register that copyright in the USA, if you happen to know?
There is an intellectual property office or a copyright office in the US. Theirs are separate for like trademarks, patents, copyright. So you would go through their copyright office for registration. I don't have the URL at the top of mind, but that's who you would go through.
Is that Library of Congress, Vanessa, that you're referring to?
It might be.
Okay.
yeah, I think that
Okay.
check there. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I hope that gives our attendees somewhere to start. Is that the same as, I know because I'm a member at SOCAN, so it gives you the option of selecting like ASCAP or BMI. Is that kind of similar? Is that the same thing?
It's not. No, ASCAP or BMI are basically the US equivalents to SOCAN performing rights.
Gotcha.
So each territory has its own performing rights organization that they do the same thing in each country. The US have, oh gosh, they might have 4 now. I think there's ASCAP, BMI, CSAC. I think there's GMR. So they have a few in the US.
Okay. And I see, would that apply to the UK as well? Thank you guys for all these questions. Like, I think this is the first workshop we've gotten like halfway through and there's so many questions. Would that apply to the UK as also?
The performing rights organization?
No, I think that was for you, Anesta, just in terms of registering that copyright as well.
I don't know the UK system well enough to say for sure, but generally for most countries, there's an office in charge of like registration and setting like rates. So usually putting in like UK copyright office will get you on the right track to finding out who you need to register with or if that's necessary.
Yeah. I think, oh yeah, go ahead, Nicole.
No, I was just going to say, what I would say too is if you ever, are looking for information from other territories too, like the performing rights and reproduction rights organizations in those territories are really helpful. So they could also potentially, put you in the right direction. So if you're looking for information on the copyright in the UK, you could always reach out to PRS or MCPS, which are the PROs and the MRO in the UK.
Okay, I'm trying to keep track. I'm gonna ask, just because I didn't anticipate all these questions, but I'm just gonna ask. Jasmine, these are great questions and I definitely want to get to them. Would you mind just copying them into the question and answer section? Because that kind of lays it out a little bit better for me rather than scrolling through the chat. But please do, so I can get to them because they're really, really good questions. So just moving on to, we have you representing SOCAN and Music Canada and Connect. What are the organizations that music creators, or maybe not even just music creators, but maybe you have a part in that song coming together before it gets out? Who are you registering with in terms of organizations?
So there's a few. Obviously, there's SOCAN for performing rights and reproduction rights. I think it really depends on what type of rights owner you are. So if you're a songwriter and you own your copyright, then it would be, SOCAN for those rights. An SOX at Connect. So there's master rights. If you're a master right owner, you can collect neighboring. I'm not going to speak to that. I'll let her speak a little bit to that as well. But there's, I'm trying to think, other organizations. Maybe you can jump in, Anessa. I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah, for sure. Even just like trying to lay them out is a bit confusing because of the different ones. But I think, like you said, like going by role, I think is a very clear way. So like songwriter, you'd be with SOCAN. For reproduction, you'd be with SOCAN RR or CMRRA, I believe, for the mechanical rights.
Yeah.
And the mechanical rights are the reproduction of the musical work. And then on the sound recording side, which is where I live in Connect's sphere, for the reproduction of a sound recording or the public performance, the organizations you want to sign up with are Resound for the public performance or one of their member organizations, because they can also distribute your royalties. And then for the reproduction side, it would be Connect, or if you're Quebec-based, it would be SOCROC.
Yes, thank you. I think what we could have done was probably break it down in terms of roles. So what I'm understanding is that if you are a a songwriter, you may not be registering with some of the organizations that say a label would be registering with.
Right.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Got it. So one of the things that we are seeing now is that I know even for myself, there's one person who's coming up with the lyrics, one person, the same person is singing, the same person is producing, sometimes the same person is mixing, and they record themselves at home. So now I'm pretty sure, like for myself, you'd be dabbling in a whole lot of different rights in terms of what you're entitled to. So for an artist like that, what are the royalties that I'd be entitled to? Who would I be registering with as someone who basically does everything except like the engineering part of the music?
Mhm. Yeah, so it would be the same. Yeah, as a songwriter, you're
Mhm.
you're creating the work. So it's you can kind of look at it as here's the composition, here's the
Okay.
sound recording. So for my composition, I'm gonna want to register for performing rights and reproduction
Mhm.
rights. So that's
Okay.
SOCAN or CMRA, whoever you decide to go with. For uh, as a master right owner, so a sound recording owner, you would want to sign up with a Resound or the ones that Anessa mentioned, that Connect, or through one of those organizations, to make sure that you're getting those neighboring rights. Yeah.
And could you just explain for us what neighboring rights are, Nicole?
I'm going to defer to Anessa on that one.
No problem.
Happy to. So neighboring rights are essentially the rights of performers on a sound recording, which can include the recording artists, the session musicians, and the backing vocalists, for example. And then the makers, who are the owners of the sound recording, which is usually the label, or again, the artist if you're working independently. And that's your
Mhm.
right to receive payment for the broadcast and performance of the sound recording. So this isn't like an exclusive right, like copyright. So when
Mhm.
someone wants to broadcast or perform the sound recording, they don't need permission. They just need to pay for that use. So in Canada, when someone makes that use, 50% of the royalties go to those performers, and then 50% will go to the makers of the sound recording. Yeah.
Thank you. And how does an artist keep track of all of this? Like all these different streams, just trying to, if you were creating the music and having to manage the business as well, I think that's a balance that a lot of individuals in the creative industry are just, trying to find. Are there any like hacks as to how to keep track of everything?
I mean, it's always been an industry that I said I'm continuing to learn always, like all even being in
Imagine.
as long as I've been here, it's constant growth. So I get it, especially if you're not as familiar with it. Um, I wouldn't say that there's a hack, um, but I think it's important to really like do things like this, like come to
Mhm.
the webinars. There's a lot of information out there, and sometimes it's a little bit scary, but again, I think your rights organizations are a really good source
Mhm.
to help you kind of keep it all straight and give you, point you in the right direction. So I would say, talk to your rights organizations, take time to come to the webinars, like educate
Mhm.
yourself. If you're really, it can be a lot, but I think if you're really serious about monetizing your art, then you kind of almost have to treat it a little bit like a business,
Yeah.
and really try and understand some of the ins and outs. You don't have to be a
Yeah.
professional always, but just taking that time to really educate yourself, spend time with or join groups with like-minded people in your community that are doing the same sort of thing and that you can learn from each other.
Mhm.
And really just, ask the questions. There's a lot of information out there, but I think if you ask the questions and reach out to those in the industry, there's a ton of people that are willing to, help or provide, or at least point you in the right direction and provide some information.
And one question to you, Nicole, that just kind of popped back was, what are, like, in terms of, are there any like rules in terms of copyright? I know, I will give a personal story. I was actually in the process of working with a studio, um and they wanted to make, say, an exchange, like studio time for copyright.
Mm,
So, as someone who's been in the industry, are there rules around that? Because that did not feel right to me. Where, I create a song, and the studio that I'm working with has like no hand in the creation. They just record. But yet there's like a contract presented to me that, like, we'll take 40% of this, and this is the exchange for that. Like, what are some of the red flags when it comes on to those copyright entitlement?
mhm. I mean, what I would say is, your copyright, you being able to monetize, own your work,
Mhm.
be able to collect money is really, it's how you monetize, right? It's how you earn. When you own a piece of your creation, that's how you're gonna get paid. Um, so for me, I would say if it doesn't feel good, you should probably, trust your gut, ask for some help from people who you trust to get some advice, speak to a lawyer, all those things that I think you really have to do what's right for you in the end.
Yeah.
Um, and trust yourself and just understand what you're giving up if you sign a specific contract. Really
Mhm.
understand what you're signing and what you're potentially giving away, and sometimes people are okay with that because there's a certain opportunity, sometimes not. So I think it really depends on the person and what their situation is and where they're at in their career. That's my
And that's
advice.
the from a legal perspective, is that like a no on the legal side of things? Is it it's up to you? Like, what's your view on that?
Yeah, legally, that could be a very reasonable contract for two people to enter into.
Mhm.
But as Nicole said, it really does depend on what you're willing to give up and whether what you're getting for it is enough for you. So I think it's really important when you're working in a studio or with a producer to have an agreement at that time before you start recording about how you're going to be paid or how they're going to be paid and where the copyright is going to vest, because it could be something like you own the copyright, but they get profits from the recording or they get royalties or something going forward. So I think it's also just knowing your options and not thinking that
Yeah.
this is the agreement they gave me, this is the only option for me.
And can we talk a little bit more about just the necessity of contracts? Like, when do they become essential? I know that, from having like collaborated with other artists and producers on stuff, it's kind of usually like, oh, I like your vibe. Oh, I like your vibe too. Let's work on a track. And you do the track and then you put out the track. Like, there's no talk about what happens when, money starts to come in. And I've seen, in some cases where it was just a little fun get together. We vibed, we had a jam session, and then the song blows up and it leads to all sort of problems. So, can you talk a little bit about, when those contracts become necessary, and even what what constitutes like a contract that would be acceptable? Because I know that as emerging artists, like, a lot of us don't have maybe the finances or access to a professional that could actually help with this stuff. So just kind of give us a little help in that aspect of things.
For sure. So I think from the legal side, the best point of time to have a contract is at the production or creation of the song and the
Mhm.
recording, like not afterwards, not like when a conflict comes up down the line, like you're in the
Yeah.
room with your other songwriters and artists, get a split sheet done, like a written agreement saying this person has this much ownership in the song, get everyone to sign it so that when you go to an organization like SOCAN and royalties are coming in, it's already defined who's getting what, and it doesn't become oh, I was the one who did this or I did
Mhm.
that. Like it's already written down and established. And then same, like I've mentioned on the production side, like having that already there in before you start recording, how ownership will be divided, how payments are going to be made. Having that in advance will really just set you up for success later on. And these don't have to be super complicated. I think these can be a little bit simpler because it really just is like person A owns this percent, person B owns this percent, and then like signatures. It can be that simple. But a lot of lawyers in the entertainment space are also quite willing to work with artists and emerging artists to be able to figure out how to draft these types of agreements.
Yeah.
And there's also some free legal aid services that are available, I know in Toronto specifically, that can also provide advice, which can be really helpful because once you have the knowledge, you can apply that going forward. So it's a like one-time investment, and then you're kind of good going forward for that.
I know for one thing that was really helpful for me when I was a student at Ryerson. So if anyone here is a student, you might want to check this out because I had no idea until someone told me about it. But there was a lawyer that worked on campus, or I think worked with maybe some student groups on campus, that was actually willing to look over a contract that I got, which was really helpful. So if you have access to, university in that way, and there's someone who probably is on campus who has that expertise, I think that's really kind of helpful just to reach out and ask them questions and show them contracts and just kind of gain a little bit more knowledge or at least some hands-on help. But that was really helpful for me a couple years ago. So I'll just stick that in there for anyone who's kind of wondering where to start. Just on contracts, what are some of the red flags? A lot of us who are on this side have probably never seen a contract, maybe only seen one or two. Like, what are some of the things that we can look out for?
I think I'd say at first it also depends on your situation and what you're hoping to get out of the contract, because what might be like a red flag for someone else might not be for another. But I do think the key things that you should look out for is if they're making guarantees or promises that they won't put into the agreement, that's a red flag, because you can't really hinge everything on what someone says. If they really mean it, they'll put it in the agreement so that you can rely on it in case something were to go poorly, for example. And I think also just being aware of the scope and the term of the contract, like being sure what degree of your rights you're going to like continue to control, or what you're giving away, and whether you're being adequately compensated for that. That might be a bit more difficult to determine on your own. But if it's like you're giving away all your copyright and all your publishing, and it's not seeming like it's going to benefit you, that's something that you should be aware of. And also if a contract, the timing of it, whether it feels like it's too long and you might want to move on from it, or if it's not long enough, those are things you should consider as well.
And whether you or Nicole, just out of curiosity, are there any scenarios that you probably come upon in your time working in this area of the industry that, whether it's conflicts around just like rights and just royalties, without obviously disclosing too much information, if there's any experience that you've kind of gone through or seen hands-on that would be helpful to artists that are here?
I would think for me, it really always usually comes down to what Anessa was talking about earlier, and agreeing on shares, right? That seems to be the thing that comes up a lot, because people don't take the time to, okay, we're going to decide that I get this, you get this, before they leave the room. It's so important. I agree with everything you said, that when you're in the creation process, before you leave that room and close it off, like make sure you've agreed, this is what you're claiming, this is what I'm claiming, so that, you can go and register that work with, a SOCAN or, a Connect. And then later on, it won't be a problem because you've agreed, it's signed, you said, okay, this is what we agreed to. Because it does often happen where later down the road, it's like, oh, but you said we were going to split this, or we were going to do it this way. And then there's always that conflict. Someone goes and registers the work without and doesn't put your name on it. Things like that do actually come up. So it's really, really important that you have that agreement up front. And the other thing that we didn't talk about, but I do want to stress to people is that when you are registering your work, so you want to, if you ever want to monetize your art, the thing that you really, really should do is provide metadata. So provide the title, the songwriter name, your shares, your IP information was your intellectual property identifier, the IPI number. This information is crucial to be able to, for us to be able to collect the money from all these different places, right? From if we're going to collect money on a digital side, it's really important that we have ISRC numbers or ISWC numbers. So all these different music identifiers, it's when you're registering your work, ensure that your information is as complete as possible, because we use all this information to then say, okay, we're collecting from, this broadcaster, from this DSP, from this, record company. And it just helps make the process so much easier if we have all the information. So when you're registering, provide as much information as possible, provide your splits, and yeah, take it from there.
Thank you. I see a lot of questions that I do want to get to, and I think I'm just gonna leave a little bit more than the half hour. But one that I really want to ask, that I think kind of gets a little bit confusing, but is on the rise, is selling beats. How does the copyright work when can you even sell a beat to someone? Like what is the actual law around that? Does the copyright get transferred? Does there have to be a contract? How that even applies with some people lease where more than one artist can record on the track. Just how does that even function?
That's not something that I see a lot in my work. So Nicole, if you have anything to add,
Mm.
definitely jump in. But just I think I'll say in general, when it comes to like owning something and wanting to sell it, you also need to like assign the copyrights to someone else to ensure that they're getting the full benefit of not just like you own it, but the royalties go to someone else. So you just need to make sure that you're selling the entirety of it and make sure that you're getting that when you buy beats, for example.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. It really comes down to what's in the agreement. And if someone's selling a beat, you have to make that clear that you're assigning all of the rights over to that person who's now have the ownership, right? So I think that's just important to ensure that that's, laid out in the agreement and that's clear.
Thank you. That's actually helpful. I actually asked it because it's a question that popped up in our last two royalty workshops, because there are a lot of sites now where producers can go up and throw their beats up and people can come press a button and like they have a beat they record. But a lot of times, from what I know, there's like no agreement. There's no discussion. Sometimes multiple people can buy the beat. So I'm like, what if the song blows up with a particular artist? Like how confusing does that get? Like what could be put in place to just kind of make that a smoother process?
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand, like, if you are making that available for other people, are you selling it to that person or are you licensing it to that person, right? Because if you're selling it outright, you're assigning the rights, you're relinquishing your rights in most cases if it's a sale. If you're licensing, then you're still retaining your rights, you're just allowing the use, right? So I think it's really important to ensure that that's clear in whatever agreement or process that you have when selling. Yeah.
So I guess you would say like knowing your terminology is very, very important.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So the last one I have is kind of a bonus, because I told you I like really, really honest answers. Sometimes I'll spring some on. But from being in the side of the industry, working on the business side of it, are there any changes that you think could be made to the current system that's in place that would make it easier for artists, or just the general process of collecting rights and royalties? You can take a while and like think about it.
That's a good question. What could be easier? It's like I said, it's so complex, and I feel like I'm still learning. I think the more organizations work together and kind of
Yeah.
make this information available to songwriters and artists coming up, I think the better for the industry as a whole. I do see that there are more and more, webinars and things like this. I mean, the pandemic did a really weird thing for us where, in a way it kept us apart, but it kind of brought us together a little bit, because now we're able to have these webinars and share this information, whereas maybe you didn't know something was going on because it was in another part of the city. So being able to do these things virtually, I think, are really, really helpful. So I think, organizations coming together, you've got Canadian Music Week and things like that, and just doing more of those type of, informational kind of events for artists, because like you said, it's people don't always know. And the education piece is really, really important for artists to be able to understand, what their rights are, and how they can really make a living out of their art. So yeah, I would say just continuing on this path and having more kind of education available.
I was gonna say pretty much the same thing. Like, I know some of the artists I've spoken to are like, I wish there was a one-stop shop that I go there and I could just know exactly where I need to sign up and like all the information. And that's, not possible. We just have so many different like organizations. But I do think that there's so much more collaboration happening, and there are so many resources available on the websites of these organizations, and just reaching out to them, that I think, just to focus on the artist side as well, as an education portion, in addition to the distribution of royalties side. Yeah.
Thank you. Amazing answers on spot. I love to see it. All right, so let's get to some of the questions. Jasmine has a few. So is there a division or someone at SOCAN who deals specifically with international copyrights? Or how would an artist go about getting works registered? Is there an agent or publisher? So I guess just looking at how you get registered in various countries, if I'm correct, Jasmine, and if there's someone that kind of takes care of that.
Yeah, so we do have an international relations department at SOCAN who deals with our international royalties. So we have reciprocal agreements with other territories. So we will collect royalties in our country on behalf of them, and they will do the same in their country. So yes, there is a division that manages that. The way we register the works is through a tool called Sysnat. It's kind of I don't know how to describe it, but it's like an international repository where all countries will put their shares and splits and things like that we can then have access to. We provide our splits, and then that kind of gets disseminated across in the different areas. So it's kind of like a source of truth for international works. So if you sign up with SOCAN and you affiliate and allow us to collect and administer your works worldwide, then through our reciprocal agreements, we'll be able to collect international royalties on your behalf.
Is there, or should I say, are there specific regions that SOCAN collects from, or is it like me being an artist that works in Jamaica and Canada? Do I need to register with SOCAN here and then register with JCAP there, or is it like SOCAN will collect all my royalties?
So there are specific countries because we're a part of, I think it's the Berne Convention. Don't quote me, sorry, don't quote me on that. But it is a specific group of territories that belong to this convention where we have these reciprocal agreements. I don't have a full list. But I think if you reach out to somebody in the international department at SOCAN, they can definitely answer that question for you.
Great.
Yeah.
I think Jasmine was asking, is it automatic or do we have to register? I think you said when we register with SOCAN, then that part is just taken care of.
Yeah, when you register with SOCAN and you allow us to, I think you can choose whether it's what territory you want us to administer on your behalf. It could be Canada only, or it could be Canada and rest of world. And if you select rest of world, then we will do that. So it's your choice.
So you opt in for the
Yes.
option.
Yeah.
See anonymous here, but just one of the attendees was asking, is there a cost to register? I think that was relating to the SIPO, the intellectual property. And I think Anesta did say there's a small fee to register the works, right? But there's no cost to register with SOCAN.
No cost for
Right?
SOCAN. No.
Alrighty. Jasmine coming through with all the questions today. I love it. What if people want to cover your song on YouTube or TikTok? So I guess it's kind of figuring out if there's a legal process behind that, or if people, I see where people just cover things now, and some artists are okay with it and some artists completely like shut it down. I know Prince was like big on like, no, like this is my work. Where some artists actually come in and they're like, oh, I love this cover. What is the whole legal world behind covering a song on social media?
Do you want to answer it, Anessa? You want? Yeah.
I'll let you start on this one.
Okay. So cover songs, in the physical world, cover songs, you can get a license. So basically you would come to an organization such as SOCAN RR and say, okay, here's a song that I want to cover. And we would issue a license to you to be able to cover the work. So if you're an artist and somebody wants to cover your work and you're affiliated with us, we can do that on your behalf. When it comes to social media, it's newer. It's a little bit it's different. Things are just starting to be monetized on these social media platforms. YouTube, we already have established workflow with YouTube where we issue licenses. It works the same way. People can cover. It's monetized. They will pay us, and we will pay you. The different social medias, I think TikTok, Instagram, I think those are kind of coming around to understanding that they do need to have the works or the music that that are played on their platforms licensed. So when you sign up with an organization, they can issue licenses on your behalf if somebody says, yeah, I want to use this song. So it's all copywritten work that needs to be licensed. So they should be coming to these organizations to get those licenses.
And just a question, I know you were talking about collecting from YouTube. So for people like myself that are registered with like DistroKid or like CD Baby, I know there's TuneCore and a bunch of others. How does that work? Because now you have like DistroKid is claiming from YouTube for me, and then SOCAN would be doing like what's the behind the scenes process in terms of me actually just getting paid?
Yeah, that I honestly I don't know the ins and outs of all the different distributors, but from what I understand, they are distributors, or CD Baby I think is a distributor and will collect on behalf. I don't want to say the wrong thing, honestly, because I don't fully understand all those areas of what they do. So yeah, I don't know, Anessa, if you have any other details on that. Okay, yeah.
It was just a question out of that's okay. I know I sprung it on you guys. It was just a question out of curiosity because I know that like I'm with DistroKid, so not an advertisement, just personal experience. So I know they give me the option of actually collecting from YouTube for my works, and I guess Spotify and all those other every store that they distribute to. But I didn't know that SoCan actually um collects from YouTube for you as well. So I
Yeah.
was just wondering, like, does it become like who actually ends up collecting, in the end?
Yeah,
So
I mean, I would
that.
think that they would have to, like, that would be something that you'd have to understand what it is actually, what they're collecting on your behalf, with whatever's in
Yeah.
your agreement.
Yeah.
And then that might be something where you would have to potentially exclude that from your agreement. I'm not
Mhm.
sure.
They do
I don't know the
they
terms
do
of
do
yeah, I don't know what the terms
yeah.
are of those specific ones, so it's hard to say without knowing what's in there.
I know they do give you the option, but I always just like opted into it because I wasn't sure, like
Right.
you said, all this confusion around
Yeah.
collecting, and I wasn't even sure if, like, okay, does Soken collect this for me? Like,
Right.
would those royalties just like get left there
Yeah.
if I don't ask DistroKid to do it for me? So I
Mhm.
guess opting in was just like, let me be on the
Better
safe
to
side.
collect than not, right? Better to
No,
collect than not than
Definitely.
miss out.
yeah.
I totally get it. I totally get it. Yeah.
So we have two more. Um Oh, so Jasmine was just asking, I guess, the process. So if she's a singer-songwriter, that's, has a song that she wants to put out. So she's asking, do you register everything with SoCan and then with Sipo and then with Resound? Are you registering with Connect? Like, I guess just looking for a step by step, like, this is what I do when I'm ready to put something out.
Mm,
Don't know who wants to like
Yeah,
jump on
I'll
that.
sure, I
go
can.
for it,
Yeah.
Anessa.
Great. Okay. So I'm just gonna also pull up the Q&A so I can read it. So yeah, I think the start would be registering it with CPO. So there's the copyright in the work. And then you're just registering it with all the appropriate collectives, organizations. So SoCan, assuming you are like the songwriter, the publisher,
Mhm.
and you own the masters, saying that you're the artist who did it all. As a songwriter, you then, sign up with SoCan, and also SoCan RR or CMRRA for the mechanical royalties side. And then you would connect with, you would, you would, you would join or sign up with Resound for the performance side, and then connect in SoProc or SoProc for the reproduction side. So yeah, you had all the organizations, right? I think it's just SIPO first and then all the different. And the order of who you sign up with first is less important as long as you're signing up with all the appropriate CMOs.
And you can think about it like CPO is there to secure your copyright, and then all these other organizations are to be able to monetize. So that, if you want to look at it that way, that's also. Mhm.
Alrighty. And Byron had just messaged with our answers. So I really, really appreciate that. Saying that DistroKid actually collects mechanical royalties from YouTube. Nicole, do you want to just tell us real quick what mechanical royalties are?
Yeah. So mechanical royalties is kind of the old way of us saying reproduction right. Mechanical, historically, I think it just came out of way back in the day when there were like player pianos, and it was actually the
Yeah.
mechanics behind reproduction. So that's where mechanicals came from. But it's reproduction right. So anytime there's a copy made of your composition, your song, that's a reproduction right. So it could be a sync, it could be CDs, vinyl, anything like that. Yeah.
Alrighty. This is a great one. I really appreciate this one because I know majority of the persons who come onto our workshops are artists, but they're also people who want to get in on the business side. So someone's just asking here, how does a recording label collect royalties for someone who's starting up a label?
Yeah, so similar to an artist that were to own their masters, and just to clarify, owning a master is just owning the sound recording itself, the entirety of the song. So they would just sign up with the collective organization, and a lot of them can have like direct deals as well. So yeah, signing up with the CMO, the collective management organization, or if they're licensing directly, signing up with that user so that they're getting the license and the royalties in exchange. Yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Nicole. Okay.
Alrighty. What if you produce the track? So Jasmine, just clarify for me, are you asking who you would sign up with if you produce the track? And what do you mean by if you own the master? So Anesta, I think this is a question for you.
So yeah, owning the masters is being the rights holder in the sound recording.
So there's the actual creation of the song, or like composition. So that's music and lyrics, right?
Mhm.
And then there's the recording. So that's when you actually like put it into a system and put it out as something that people can stream, right?
Exactly.
Or like play back, yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
What if you create the track stems but record with another producer? Okay, so I think we kind of touched a little bit on this in the webinar, but I think Jasmine's just asking what royalties you would be entitled to if you actually you're the composer, like you did the whole arrangement and created all the tracks and the stems, and I guess who you would register with. But recording them. Yeah. So who would you register with if you were the one who actually created the music behind? I think that's SoCan, right?
Yeah. So if you're creating the music itself, then you would be part. So there's like what you said in the composition. There's music and lyrics. In most cases, sometimes just music. But if you create the music, then you're the song owner, right? The copyright owner of the composition. If you're a producer in the sense of, you're making a beat, or trying to like putting everything together with an engineer and things like that, sometimes, and I know in especially in, if we're talking Afro hip hop, R&B, producers sometimes will get a part of the copyright. But again, that's an agreement that people make when they're in the room, because it really depends on what their contribution is to the song. With with music that is often in within our culture, producers, when someone's producing a work, it's very musical. They're making the composition, that sort of thing. So people will agree to give producers a piece of that work. But a lot of the times as well, a producer may only get we may have a separate producer agreement, which is separate from the actual ownership of the composition. So it really depends on what the agreement is with the people in the room. Sometimes a producer is considered a songwriter, and so gets part of the songwriter royalties, and that would come from SOCAN, performing rights or reproduction rights, or it's separate and it's a producer agreement that has different terms.
So I see your question, Jasmine. I'm definitely gonna get to that, but I feel like we're touching on something here. Is a producer, because I know we use like composer, like the person who's actually playing all the sounds interchangeably with producer, but I'm kind of getting the idea that they may not be the same thing in every
Not
case.
not always. And that's where I was trying to say, like, it's not always the case, right? Like I can be a songwriter, for example. I'll use my own personal experience. I was a songwriter. I'd write melody and lyrics, on piano, guitar, whatever it is, and I would compose a song. I'm the composer. I'd write it solely myself. Then I might work with a producer who would help me take my song, that already fully formed song composition, and produce it into something that would be good in a sound recording. So they'd help me with, the production, the sounds, the orchestration, the arrangement, things like that. That in those cases, in my personal situation, just mine, that producer wouldn't be entitled to my composition, to my songwriter royalties, because I wrote the fulsome song on its own. This person just helped me produce and make it into a recording. However, like I was saying, in some of the music that is prevalent in our community and BIPOC community, the producer has more involvement as far as the creation of the song from the ground up, right? So that's where people might decide, okay, you're a songwriter, you've helped me write this song, and then they would be entitled to part of the copyright as well. So that's where it's really important to understand before you leave the room who's contributing what and what their share is going to be. And that is completely up to you and those individuals in the room. There's no there's no law around producers having to get a certain amount. It really does come down to the agreements between those individuals. Do you have anything to add, Anesta? I don't want to take up all the space.
No, that's exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I think that brings us back to the question. So if you, okay, I think this, a lot of people could relate to this. So they create the music themselves and then they go and they record with another producer who may have like studio space and, you know, access. So in that case, who would own masters? Jasmine, I'm assuming you probably would pay this person when you go record with them. So if it's a case where they are paid, who would own the masters for that song?
It could depend. I think you can have an agreement saying the masters are going to stay with the artist, but the producer receives a fee. Like it's, yeah, it's not, because if a record label, for example, an artist signed with the label owns the masters because they are the ones who like financed it, and that's the agreement that they have. So again, it depends, which is a very lawyerish answer, but yeah, depends on the agreement.
Yeah. Okay, so Byron was just asking Nicole, would that be considered a musician for hire? So I guess that was with your particular situation where you had someone kind of help you make it like sound recording ready. Would they be considered a musician for hire?
No, a musician for hire is usually someone who's in the studio with you doing the recording. Sometimes they have some, you know, liberties on the work. So yes, what you're saying, it could be a musician for hire. I don't want to say no. It could be a musician for hire depending on what they contribute, right? Like if they're playing instruments, if they're doing things like that, if they're, you know, programming things that contribute to it, it could be a musician for hire situation. So yes. But I know that there are also very like specific producer agreements where producers may say, okay, well, we don't own the copyright, but we get, you know, a part of the artist royalty that maybe if they're signed to a record label. So that's where I'm saying the terms of a producer agreement are often very different than deciding whether or not somebody has a portion of your song, your composition, your song. Yeah.
So it kind of seems like it just all comes down to the agreement when you.
It really does. I can't stress it enough. It really does decide, like it does come down to what you decide, right? What terms you agree upon. One thing I learned in school, and I will never forget, and it's the thing that carried me through all the time when I was trying to, you know, make it in the industry, was if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. It was the rule that I heard it and I lived by it my whole life. If it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. And it's a really good thing to take with you, because if you ever get in a situation where somebody is disputing, even if you agreed, like, yeah, verbally, and then somebody wants to come down and say, oh no, we didn't agree. It really comes down to your word against theirs, unless you have it in writing, right? And it's signed and it's agreed. So that's the thing that's really taken me through my career.
Yeah, I don't think I'm anywhere near perfect with record keeping and all of that stuff. I think it's the downfall of like every artist. Like we're really good at creating and really bad at organizing stuff. But one thing I started doing, and I think a lot of it came from actually starting another side hustle, which was like had nothing to do with, I think with music, it kind of gets cloudy because you're the individual and you're also the music. And so the product can't exist without you. So it's kind of like hard to separate yourself from it. But starting something where I was not the product kind of made me see like a lot of leaks in my music career. Like one thing I started doing was getting invoices from everyone for everything and just keeping a record of all those emails and everything, because if I do majority of the work by myself, but if I pay someone, to do something else, it could always come around like, no, you didn't. Like, no, you didn't pay me.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it was really helpful. It was just peace of mind because there's stuff that I would have worked on before, and I'm just like, what do I do if this person just decides that, they want to come for me, for me, even though I know verbally everything was good. But it definitely gives you peace of mind to just have some records, some emails,
Yes.
some agreement somewhere that
Exactly.
Yeah,
we can.
definitely.
And I'm glad you said that. Like it could be an email, it could be a text, anything,
Mhm.
if you can't get it formalized and like it doesn't have to be in crazy legalese so people, it just needs to be written down, right? That's
Yeah.
still a
Mhm.
contract that you have with somebody. So it's a really good thing to do. And it's called the music business, right? We're in the music business. It's so we need to sometimes I think artists forget that, and I understand because you're creating, and that's not your
Yeah.
headspace. Your headspace is in creating your art, which I completely understand and respect. But when it comes down to monetization, that's
Hmm.
when we need to really, pull the business side together.
I think that's a great note. If no one has, another question, if you do have a question, get it in now because we're winding down. Um, but I guess the last thing, just to the panelists, are there any resources, any general takeaway? I know Nicole, you gave us a really strong one about getting it in writing. But just anything to kind of finish off, places people can go to get more information, all that good stuff.
Mhm.
And
I will say, yeah, that Connect, we've started really focusing on this idea of like the artist entrepreneur. So we have a lot of webinars and infographics and like a link to every organization, well, every organization we at least know of that you can
Yeah.
use as a reference. And that's all on our website. So I will always plug it. I even like reviewed the videos before today to make sure I understood how everything kind of worked. So I think, again, the education piece is so important. Advanced, the Black Music Business Collective,
yeah,
amazing organization. Definitely recommend signing up. It's so good for education, but also just networking and seeing what events are going on and really just growing your community. So I
mhm,
really recommend them. Yeah, those are the two that I had on my list.
mhm. I have
Vans
the
is
same.
really great too,
I
because
have the
I
same
reached
thing.
out
Yeah,
with them and to them, and they were very just helpful in getting back with everything that we needed. So I can definitely vouch for Advance.
absolutely.
And
It's a
yeah,
great organization. I'm so glad they're around.
Mhm.
Yeah. And SoCan's connected with them as well. So yeah, it's a community. It's a
yeah.
community.
Alrighty. Any final questions from attendees? I think this has been probably my most engaging workshop to date,
Awesome.
which is
Yeah.
really great because usually, with a topic like this, that's kind of it's confusing and it's hard to actually just grasp everything. People tend to just kind of just be quiet, like nobody really wants to get out there, ask the questions and stuff. So I'm glad we had such an interactive group. Jasmine just asking what was the organization. Um,
Advance.
Yeah.
no, I see. But I think we were talking about Advance. I think Jasmine.
Mhm.
Um, so if you type in Advance Music, I actually will just put it here
Mhm.
for everyone.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
they've been really helpful. It's a great initiative. Is like the only way I can put it. Um, they have job listings on their site.
Yeah.
Uh, it's just and it's was talking about that one-stop shop. It's not a one-stop
Mhm.
shop for rights and royalties, but it's definitely a good place to just start
Mhm.
to see like what's going on in the industry. They actually list team members and people who are involved with them, so it's something I appreciated, because so many times, which is part of why we even have these workshops, is you go onto a site and you see everything that they do, but there's like no human there that you can actually connect to the organization. So just seeing that's just refreshing. You can see, who's involved and potentially reach out to them. I think this may be another question just before we end off. If a composer friend asked me to compose a piece and they said they would give me credit as an additional composer. Oops, sorry, just missed that. And after I sent my piece to them, they told me the director can't give me that credit because the director choose what they wrote instead of what I wrote. Is this a whole thing a good practice? I just want to get a second opinion because I felt uncomfortable. So what I'm understanding is that there was an agreement that you would play a particular part, and then after you did that, it was kind of just pushed aside and something else was chosen. Oh, so I guess just one. I guess it sounds to me like you're just wondering if this was just a learning experience or if it was a legal thing. Am I getting that right? Okay, this sounds like an Anesta question. It kind of sounds like you're wondering if it's something that you could pursue if you wanted to, or if it's just something that isn't kind of applicable in that way, but rather just a learning experience.
Not legal advice, but I would say, I think if they're not actually using the work, then you're not really entitled on the copyright side to any type of credit. If they were, then definitely pursue, because that's something that you are owed. But I think as a next time this would happen, even if it is informally communicated via text, like you do want to get something, I guess, more concrete in writing. If it's going to be something as in like you're providing work, but you want to be compensated for it, even if it's not used, that's a very specific situation that you'd want to have carved out. That's my first take.
And I would suggest too, like if it is something that you're going to pass on to somebody for potential use, register the work. Try and register that work before you do pass it on to anybody, because if they do come back and say, oh, we didn't use it, and you find out that it was used, again, you need that proof to show that you did, it's actually your composition. So if you have any kind of proof or registration, then that would be helpful as well.
I think that's very important for, like producers, as we use the term in today's society, but also people who are looking to get into songwriting professionally. I know for me, just trying to explore avenues outside of just recording artists, I've sent a couple of my, like my songs, my lyrics and stuff to people, and you can get varied responses. Like you get people who want to work with you, you get people who don't respond at all. And you get people who are just like, oh, no, not for us. But they still have that demo, they still have that recording, and people who say no or don't respond could come out like the next month with your track. So I think that's very good advice to actually go ahead and register that, because if that situation does happen, and you never know when it does, you're covered in that way. A lot of time technology fails us, and you may have recorded it and think that there's a proof, but from experience I've lost work on hard drives. So I would say, just have yourself cover as many bases as you can. And that's a good way to go about it. But I think if that's it for questions, just want to wrap up by saying thank you again to everyone. I like to give a special thank you to the attendees all the time, because the workshops are so different when, attendees aren't as engaging or don't even show up. So I appreciate you taking the time to come here and join in on this workshop with us and asking all these great questions. It's a learning experience for myself as well. And I want to thank Nicole and Anesta for accepting our invitation to be our panelists. That always means so much to me, especially being part of Afrowaveto, where our whole inception just came about because it's just so hard to get the information. It's so hard to reach people. and kind of fill that void for everyone that's coming up as an entrepreneur in this music industry. So thank you both so much. I
Thank you
hope,
for coming
yeah, no
in.
problem. Thank you for being. I hope everyone learned something today. I know I did. And I just want to wish you all a great night. Our next workshop will be next Thursday. It's about music marketing and publicity. So I think that would be a great one for everyone who's just trying to get their music out there. We will have a representative from Live Nation, as well as Dalton Higgins, who's also, he's in PR and kind of helps artists to get their music out and to get people aware of artists' music. So I think that would be a great workshop for anyone who's trying to put songs out. But thank you again, everyone, and I wish you all a great night.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone. Have a great night.
Bye.